Okay, so we're developing over the course of the autumn, we're developing these 10 qualities, these parami: generosity, ethical conduct, renunciation, wisdom, energy, patience, truthfulness, determination, resolution, loving kindness, and equanimity. And in the last Zoom meeting, we looked at generosity, and the suggestion was that we spend a couple of weeks just seeing if we can find opportunities to be generous and to, you know, become more aware of what the results of that generosity are. Does it lead to a reduction in self-concern? Does it help to cultivate happiness, and especially happiness when we meditate? If we are able to cultivate happiness and create the supporting conditions for happiness to arise in our meditations, meditation, the Buddha said, helps us to concentrate. The happy mind concentrates easily. And we want this stack. We want the happiness, then we want the concentration. And as we get the focus, then we're able to develop the insight, wisdom, and looking really closely and deeply in a sustained way into the true nature of reality. And we want to be happy when we do that. So the first one we looked at was generosity. So let's just review it, find out whether anyone's got any interesting anecdotes or observations they'd like to make about what we discussed a couple of weeks ago. And then we'll move on to the next parami, which is ethical conduct. Okay. So you have a raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen. If you have an observation you'd like to chat, then you're very welcome to hit that there raise hand icon. Peter, hello. If you'd like to take yourself off mute.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Peter. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. Yeah, I took it on board quite seriously, and I had a post-it note on my table in my flat that just said generosity to remind myself every morning when I got up. I'd catch this post-it note, and I tried or endeavored to look for any opportunities where I could be generous, sort
Okay.
of consciously. And every day I set myself a challenge to have at least one situation where I'd be consciously generous, whether it was for my time or money or whatever. And sometimes it was money, and sometimes it was giving somebody my time and listening to them. And I did feel, pleasant feelings did arrive when I performed whatever act of generosity, and people seemed to be more acceptant of me and appeared to be more trusting of me. And it sort of led on me wanting to be generous more and to keep it going, because I thought, oh, this is nice. I like the idea of this. And so more and more opportunities occurred to me during the day where I could be generous, either with my time or money or attention or whatever. And as for the meditation, like meditation every day, I wasn't overtly aware of being like blissfully happy, but it was definitely a balanced meditation. I wasn't stressed or particularly having worry come up a lot. So they were relatively calm meditations.
How did you feel about yourself then?
I felt, yeah, my self-esteem did go up because people reacted to me very positively and
Okay.
smiled at me and things like that. And it was a really interesting exercise, yeah. And just when I did it once, it made me want to do it again, which is
Well, that's
quite
good.
interesting.
Yeah. So did you find that the more you practiced it, the more opportunities seemed to present themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. And also some of the other parameters seem to kind of appear for me as well. I tended to be a bit more patient, a bit more loving, a bit more generous, a bit more determined, and have a bit more energy. It all sort of appeared to have little dots. Well, I was aware of some of the parameters, not all the time, but I was aware of them more than I used to be aware of them. by
Yeah.
just starting that domino effect of the first parami, I suppose.
That's a very good way of putting it. It's like a domino effect. It's like the idea of the tablecloth. You pick up one parami and the rest come along with it. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's really good. So yeah, we've got to keep going with this. We can't just say, well, that's the experiment dealt with. I mean, this is lifelong,
Yeah.
developing the parami, because it does produce such incredibly positive results, both obviously for other people, but also for ourselves.
Yeah,
And
people being generous to me too. They were, I got an unexpected gift and things like that.
well,
And
there you go. And something in us, when we're actually consciously practicing something like generosity, like that link, is it causation or is it just, correlated? In our minds, we're just linking them and they're nothing to do with each other. Maybe, maybe not. But the sense you get is that no, they are linked, that there is this magical reciprocal arrangement at work. And the more you become aware of it, like you say, the more you want to do it. That's great.
And I'm looking forward to doing today's parami and the generosity one in the sort of in a bunch sort of thing for the next week.
All right. Yeah. Excellent.
Thank
Ellen, hello. Thanks, Peter. Ellen.
you.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
Thanks for that, Peter. That certainly makes me think about paying attention more and doing more of it. I don't have a comment particularly related to how the meditation practice was affected. But I think to me, what I ended up learning most about was more the nature and some of the mechanics about generosity. So one example I wanted to bring up was where I had the opportunity to tip a service provider of a gentleman who came to my home, was doing some work. And I reflected on how, the company had said, well, it's nice to tip people and it's the kind of situation I would tip anyhow. But to have just provided the tip to the company where then they pass it on to the person, I intentionally said to myself, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take the money and hand it to him in person. That had a completely different feel to it. I was so interested in that. So it in a way felt like more of a connection, and then he gets to smile and I get to smile. And if he comes back as a service provider in the future, we've already got a different sort of, it was just completely different than as if some money ended up in some bucket that he ended up with through some computer. But anyhow, I thought that was super interesting. So it's more about how to make contact more authentically with people through how to do the generosity.
Yeah, it's a very good point. I mean, I don't think I know exactly what you mean. Like if I'm in a restaurant and it says like, they've added the service on, I still feel like leaving a note in the, with the dishes as I leave, because it's just that sense of actualness where it's like a physical process. I think we don't have to discount though the more automated variety. Like if I get an Amazon delivery, and as long as they really haven't mucked it up, then I just you get the email saying how did the driver do, whatever, and I just 5-star it. I just give them every single thing. I just say yes, because in some way, shape, or form, it's still going to help, isn't it? But absolutely, that real physical, that sense in which, like the other day, an Amazon guy delivered something, and I actually, for once, caught him at the door, and so we were able to have a pleasant exchange. And I just was able to express gratitude. And that's such a small thing. And you think, but it's still generosity. It's still, the energy parami is there, isn't it? It's like just putting that energy into it and having that face-to-face experience. I think that does add to it.
Okay, but don't discount the small things as well. Okay.
Don't discount small things either. No. Yeah. Definitely. So it's like it's like drops in the bucket, and we're trying to not change the culture of the mind, but develop the culture of the mind to be soft, open, pliant, receptive. That's what we want for meditation, and that's what developing these paramis will actually give us. Has anyone else got any tales, things they'd like to talk about? Lynn, hello.
Hello. Yeah, it's listening really. A neighbour had a little social get together, and I ended up talking to someone. We haven't spoken a lot in the past. We've seen each other on the street. And I didn't set out consciously to be particularly listening in a generous sort of way, but after the whole experience, when I was reflecting on it the next day, I was really listening to her, and interest came up, and I was particularly sort of centered on her and hearing what she had to say. And at the end of the conversation, there was a lovely, warm, metta, sort of loving kindness feeling. And also, I realized there was patience in listening to her. Instead of, because sometimes it's easy to think, oh, we haven't got anything in common, nothing will come up, sort of thing. But it was afterwards. And then I noticed another situation where there was patience in listening. And I thought, well, listening can be seen as generous, I'm thinking.
Absolutely, it is. I think, I try as best as I can to listen to each and every meditator when I have a chat with meditator. I do my best to listen intently rather than because I find that helps to create and establish a more genuine connection with the person, that you do know them better because you're willing to be patient. So it is extraordinarily patient, and patience is very much connected to loving kindness as well. So those two things are very sort of closely interwoven. So I think listening is a hugely generous act and compassionate act as well, because it means you're taking that person seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the payoffs of listening intently to somebody else is that they will walk away thinking how intelligent you are.
Well, at the end of the conversation, she did say something along the lines of, I hope we get a chance to talk again sometime. And there was a lovely feeling. And I think that's why I was reflecting on it afterwards. What happened there in that conversation? And without thinking consciously of what to do to be generous, it was a great opportunity that came up, and it felt good all round, and I got good feeling from her too. So yeah.
Isn't it interesting? It's one thing I noticed is that, yes, we want to be conscious of the fact that we want to develop the parami, but the opportunities are right there. And it's not making some grand idealistic gesture. It's not saving the world. It's just listening to somebody, making someone a cup of tea, buying someone an ice cream. That's, it's at that kind of level that we're really talking about. The whole thing, we'll come onto this today with the ethics. It's not making grand gestures. It's about dealing with what's right in front of you. Yeah. Excellent. Thanks, Lynn.
Yeah, thank you.
Mark.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it was a great couple of weeks. I found it really, really interesting. Some wonderful stuff to reflect on. It did make me laugh. You talked about the Amazon review. I had my car service, and I was sent one of these customer satisfaction forms, which I usually never come. I just delete the email straight away habitually. But this time I thought, no, the person who dealt with me, who sorted me out with a courtesy car and all that, she was absolutely fantastic. And I just really wanted to give her a nice review, and and sort of give her credit for being so great. And and I didn't overdo it. She was very professional, and I had a really good experience. And I just thought it was such a simple gesture, but and I felt it made me feel really good. And my meditations have been really quite, there's been a lot of equanimity and concentration over the last couple of weeks. A couple of other things that I found. One was acts of generosity, I found that I was able to see when other people were being generous. It just leapt out much more at me, seeing other people's generosity. I was on a train going to Cardiff, and there was this train, I guess it's a conductor, I don't know what they're called these days, but someone who was checking tickets and, you know, which these days seems to be pointing some infrared thingy at their phones. But anyway, and every single person he checked, he was smiling at them and he thanked them. Just really, you know, and I was just in awe watching this guy go around this carriage, you know, being so generous with his manners and his kind of his just his whole approach. He was so kind to people. And what was the last thing I was going to say? Oh yeah, the last one was acts of generosity when it enables the recipient to practice their dharma. I had a really good opportunity to help out recently on a weekend retreat, and I found myself preparing food in an afternoon, which is, you know, it wasn't a big deal. I'm not being a martyr here, but I was in the kitchen and I knew that I was in the kitchen making food, and so that other people were at that time were in their cells in meditation, you know, in their own time. And it was I could not have been happier being in that kitchen whilst they were meditating. I can't really explain it any more than that.
I completely understand. I spent 9 years as a monk, and we were working monks, which means there's a strong service element to the training, and it was exactly what I needed. The first task I was given, the first job I was given in the monastery by Brother Nigel, was to look after the house plants, and my first objective was not to kill them, and I succeeded with most of them. The ones that survived, I didn't kill, and then gradually got really quite into looking after house plants, and then having successfully dealt with house plants without killing them, they then gave me people to help, and that was like cleaning loos and cooking and, you know, hoovering, and what it did was, when I entered the monastery, my tail was so between my legs, you know. I was, you know, I think Stephen, who was Alan's assistant at the time, ordered me to pick up my head. Lift your head up when you're walking around. Because that's how low I had become. And the service aspect gave me a sense of not being, you know, not, as you were saying, not being Superman, not being super moral ethics guy, but just a reasonable human being. And that's all you need for meditation. You just need to know that the moral aspect, the moral quandary, the moral dilemma, the moral uncertainty that people are saddled with accounts for so much sorrow and anguish and misplaced behavior. And so just to get that sense that, you know, you're a decent human being, carry on. You know, that was such a huge thing. And obviously service to others, especially on retreat. And really, I cannot stress enough what a place like the House of Inner Tranquility, somewhere that's been dedicated to helping people deepen their understanding and their practice in following the Noble Eightfold Path in order to realize freedom from suffering. What an astonishingly rich field of merit that actually is. Yeah.
I was going to ask you about that, because it did bring me the question: is there a different level of return? Was the word I had in mind, but merit is probably the less
spiritually acceptable way of saying it.
Yeah. If your generosity is towards someone who is practicing, or someone, I've read that it certainly is, if it's the act is towards someone who's completed, who's enlightened. But if it's generosity so someone can practice, is the level of merit greater?
Yes, without question. It's allied though to knowledge, because intention plays a big part. So if you know that the center is an authentic center and you're generous towards it, if you know that if you believe in your, through your own experiences that the teacher has finished the training, or at the very least that the instruction that you get is authentic instruction and it really works when you put it into practice, then that really raises it up, definitely, without any shadow of a doubt. Yeah, there is unquestionably a pecking order to it. But we can't discount the small little thank yous. You called it manners. You said that the railway guy was just displaying the most incredible manners to his, to the travelers, and that is generosity, and that is service, and it is kindness, definitely. Yeah. Thanks, Mark. That's brilliant. Peter, you have your hand up.
Yes. Hopefully this is a quick point to allow you to move on. Listening to people, I found I could do much better or improve the interaction when I focused on the sound of their voice in addition to what they were actually saying. The sound of their voice, it got me feeling that I was much closer to what they were trying to say. If I put plenty of attention on just the sound of their voice.
Great tip. Thank you. And did you find that when you gave your wholehearted attention to the other person, that you quietened down internally?
Oh yes, it's a very positive thing, listening. But I just wanted to throw in this other bit, the sound, the actual sound of their voice. I found that gave me a far better feeling of being with them.
Great. Yeah. Thank you very much.
You're welcome, sir.
Thanks for that top tip.
Yeah.
Right, Hilda.
Hello. Yes, I missed the last meeting, but had quite a lot of opportunities lately to practice generosity, and I find that there's like a strong element of renunciation in there for me, at least. Like being present for other people, or like really hearing them when I'm maybe stressed or I don't know, tired, but still making an effort to try and hear what other people are saying and trying to find ways to help them. And maybe, especially I find if I'm tired or really stressed, my habitual response might be more, I don't know, I might react with anger. So it's like I'm the renunciation bit, like not reacting in that way. And then, yeah, it just becomes easier. It's like there's more flow in life. And it just builds and builds, really.
Very, very good observation. You're bringing in the renunciation. To be generous, to listen, means that you have to put your concerns to one side.
Yeah.
And how often do we find that conversations end up being extraordinarily one way, where one person dominates, and it isn't a game of ping pong. It isn't a two-way thing, because somebody dominates in that way. And when that happens, again, it's the same thing. You have to renounce your frustration or irritation with that person being so dominating. Yes, it's very difficult. But yeah, well done. Yeah, definitely. The renunciation aspect, especially, I think is really important. Anne, hello. Anne, you have.
Hi, hi, Paul. It was interesting. It was really interesting hearing everybody's comments. I wasn't here 2 weeks ago, but the concept of generosity I'm familiar with, and I was thinking it's to do with sparked off that sense of trust. When you talked about service and those plants, it feels to me that generosity has to. I'm not saying this as I'm saying this as a sort of question reflection, because if there's a sense of you don't trust somebody, then it can, that sense of undermining somebody. So it's not a fully unconditional generosity. And also I noticed, like when somebody else said about the stress, if I'm generous when I don't want to be, so with my time when I'm listening, and I don't 100% want to be, there can be quite repression afterwards. And I realize I've come out like a bit like a pressure cooker, that is because I've missed doing what I needed to do. And I find personally that I think I have a strong habit pattern of being generous, but not always balancing it as it being an equal with other people. So I don't know whether that always doesn't bring about the happiness if you're doing it from a place because you feel you don't want the other person to suffer, or you see their need as being more important. I don't know how that works with this.
Well, I think it's a really good observation, like, because, I mean, it does very much feed into what Hilda was saying. There is, renunciation takes on many forms, and it might very well be that temporarily we do actually have to practice, I don't want to say a suppression of how we're feeling, but we're certainly keeping a lid on things, because, you know, there are social graces and manners to think about. And some people, and to be honest, some people really do go on, don't they? And, you know, it's like it becomes more and more challenging to sort of just, you know, just to stay with it. And maybe there is a certain amount of decompression that has to occur afterwards for you personally, but you've still acted compassionately. And even if it is at the time there is a feeling of, you know, pressure or whatever, then subsequently you can still look back on that experience and say, well, yeah, I did my best. And, you know, it is yet more evidence that I'm actually a reasonable human being. Does that help, Anne? Because I you know, I think you're on the right lines. I don't, you know, I think sometimes like putting yourself out for other people is very unpleasant. What can I say?
I think I think it's when it's a really ingrained habit pattern. So like if my children need anything, I will put everything on hold. And I think
so it's getting the balance.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say.
I see what you're saying. I see what you're saying.
And then the anger comes afterwards. The things I wanted to do, I have not done.
Gotcha. I understand. So there's a resentment. There's a residual resentment.
Yeah, which I wish I wasn't there. I'd prefer it not to be there. So there's that trying to work with that backlash that seems to come afterwards.
So I think it's learning to accept your nature, in the sense that you're, you know, because it in many ways we are trying to deal with the problem of suffering when we act. And so we're almost like trading various forms of suffering. And so you're choosing the suffering that you're going to be there for, say, your child or your children, even though it's out of balance and it's too much. That's the habit. And then subsequently, but in acting in that way, you reduce a different kind of suffering, but subsequently you feel the suffering of the resentment. And so I think with mindful noting, the important thing is like we're learning to accept what's unfolding, even if it's, say, resentment, but we're learning not to take it seriously.
I like that.
We're learning to accept that it doesn't define me. Right. And because if you can reduce the seriousness with which you take that residual resentment, you can be light around it, then it means there is the possibility perhaps of adjusting the balance the next time. So because the next time, at a certain point, we all have to learn to say no, you know, for our own sanity, for our own well-being, because we have to be compassionate to ourselves as well. So if we can become lighter on one side of the equation, perhaps we can learn to then become lighter on the other side of the equation, which is not taking saying no so seriously.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. Sarah, this is the last one on generosity, then we'll move on to ethical conduct. Sarah, how do you?
Hi. Yeah, it was interesting having that focus. I've had the possibility to be very generous with my parents' stuff because I've had to literally give away so much this summer. And yeah, it's a lovely thing to be able to do that with no kind of, I don't want this. And I love the fact that you love it and you're getting it for nothing, or it's a charity who will sell it on and it will benefit others. It's just such a gorgeous thing. And sometimes people are shocked. Really? And this week it was a case of paint. There was a whole paint cupboard with decorators' tools, so much stuff. And I did see residual kind of, oh, I would like some of that but I don't have a home at the moment, so it's useless. But it was seeing also, and this was the point that's different from what wonderful comments other people have said, is that there was an ethical level and I suppose wisdom level where you're saying, okay, that's enough now. So a person was looking, I showed them the cupboard and they were looking at other things that I hadn't actually offered. And I saw that in myself. Oh, yeah, I could give everything away, but I haven't actually offered that. And that is something that I plan to use for another project.
Okay. No, that's it's a very good observation. We do have to measure and manage and moderate. There's no point in giving everything away. It's self-defeating, because ultimately we're doing this to cultivate happiness. And if you've given everything away and then you've got absolutely nothing, you're not going to be happy. So there is a balance that needs to be struck with all of this. Yeah. We have to be pragmatic about it. And I guess that's where the wisdom thing comes in, isn't it? Knowing what's too much. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a little bit of painful feeling because the other person was then, oh, I can't have it, kind of seeing almost greed, I suppose. But then afterwards, it was a very pleasant feeling to know, no, I kept that correct level of what was supposed to be given, etc. And it did bring happiness. And
if you find that, this is a really important point, and maybe it's something we'll touch on with ethical conduct. It's like ultimately you're not responsible for other people's painful feelings. And that our wish not to offend, not to cause other people, or what we think of as causing other people painful feelings, can cause us that misbalance. And it might go back to what Anne was talking about, which was like helping too much and being there too much for other people because you don't want them to experience the painful feeling, and then you get the painful feelings on yourself. When we get the balance right, then there might be an awareness that somebody else, say, didn't like the fact that they couldn't just walk out of the house with whatever they wanted. But ultimately, that's their problem, and that we feel fine about what we've done. So when you know that there is something to be said about that, the quietness of the mind that knows that it isn't doing anything wrong. There's a lovely quietness to it. It's, again, and that really helps over time, just this drip feed effect of cultivating this idea about ourselves, which is not arrogant, it's not conceited, but it's just saying, yeah, I'm all right, I'm living okay. That moral quandary doesn't exist for me. I know that my behavior is largely blameless, with the odd mistake. We're always allowed a mistake. Yeah. Excellent. Well done, sir. Good. Okay, so we need to then come on to the next parami, which is ethical conduct. So this is such a huge area, as I touched on before. Like, everyone is concerned about their moral standing. in their tribe, because nobody wants to get thrown out of their tribe. And one of the biggest ways that you can persecute somebody is to throw them out of a tribe that they belong to. And we see that a lot in our modern world, with all this cancelling that goes on and so forth. And so that moral question, that personal moral question about, am I a good person or not? How do I demonstrate that I'm a good person or not? It's something that preoccupies pretty much everyone, I'd say. And the beautiful thing about the Buddhist teaching is it just simplifies the whole thing. The whole moral conundrum is just simplified into what we call the 5 precepts. And if someone abides by the 5 precepts, they live a pretty much blameless life, and they're free to live as they wish to live, and they're not really harming or hurting other people. And it'll be interesting to see how we can introduce the other parami into this. I can already see ways in which the other parami fit in with living an ethical life. And it takes away so much of the issues and problems. So just to go through what the 5 precepts actually are. Okay, so the first thing we have to say is that they are rules of training. So it is, I undertake the rule of training to refrain from. It's not, I undertake the precepts to go around bashing other people on the head, telling them how they should live their lives. It is, I undertake the rule of training to refrain from. So it is it's about your personal responsibility and your own actions. It's not about what other people are doing. So the 5 are, I undertake the rule of training to refrain from killing or harming living creatures. I undertake the rule of training to refrain from stealing or taking that which is not given. I undertake the rule of training to refrain from sexual misconduct. I undertake the rule of training to refrain from all forms of wrong speech. And I undertake the rule of training to refrain from mind-altering drink and drugs. That's it. That's it. If you follow those 5, you won't get chucked out of your tribe. That's it. And those are that is ethical conduct, to refrain from those 5 different activities. So I'm wondering what you think about that. How might we go about actively developing the precepts? What kinds of, how is it that keeping the precepts in that way is part of cultivating happiness? How will that affect our ability to meditate? What do you think? Peter? Yeah, you're going to have to unmute yourself, my friend. Thank you.
When you were listing the precepts, the thought that arose in my head was, I was very aware of the polarities of each precept, the subtle and the gross versions of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I can tie myself up in that a bit. I suppose the one that springs to mind first is wrong speech. You know, whether you white lie not to upset somebody, or and the precept of not taking what isn't actually given to you, but was kind of inferred that you are welcome to it anyway, without somebody specifically saying, here you are. I don't know, in a social situation, you're given a cup of tea and there's a plate of biscuits there, but you weren't actually offered one specifically. That type of thing. It's sort of subtle type of stuff. And the subtler the gross versions of the precepts, and sometimes they can tie me in knots a bit, because I try to do it as perfectly as I can.
And therein lies the issue.
Yeah.
Trying to do it as perfectly as you can. It's all because it's all context driven, isn't it? It's driven by the context, and therefore it does become more subtle. So we want to avoid idealism and therefore perfection. I know they're called the perfections, and this is a bit of a cul-de-sac side, subroutine. I'm just going to mention it now. In the Jataka tales in the Pali Canon, well, they're not strictly Pali Canon, but they're part of the overall Buddhist teaching. In the Jataka tales, we hear all these stories about the Gautama's past lives and how he developed this parami and how he developed that parami, and he went to this extreme and went to that extreme. But when he became enlightened in his final incarnation as Gautama and went from being the Bodhisattva to the fully enlightened Buddha, he didn't tell people to go to those extremes. What he learned from those Jataka tales, from those past lives, were you don't have to go to extremes. It's a middle way. Yeah. So being a middle way means you don't have to be idealistic and you don't have to be perfect, and that you learn by trial and error. So you're free to make mistakes in the ethical realm. I mean, there are mistakes and there are mistakes. There's like taking a biscuit with your cup of tea from the plate when it wasn't you weren't specifically told you were able to do it is one thing. Murdering somebody is a different order of things. And so what I tell people when they first start coming along is to try to avoid the latter. Start with not killing anyone and then work your way in from there. And so it's a very broad road. The middle way of ethics is lovely and broad and wide. It's just you just don't want to go off either edge, because that's an abyss, and it means that your actions were so abhorrent and so antisocial that the results are going to be terrible. So don't go there. Stay in the middle. And we all do this. We all meander because you've got desires, you've got greed, you've got hatreds, and it's all very much bound up with this whole thing of overcoming craving and wanting life to be different than it is, and all the ways we find to try to deal with the problem of suffering through our actions. And as time goes on, if you're practicing mindfulness, your ability to recognize what those results are of those actions, so you're able to create the causal link between the action and how you're feeling now, you naturally become more skillful. And over time, what happens is you deal with all those major unskillful behavioral habits, and you're left with a dilemma like, oh, I was eating those biscuits. I'm not sure that person gave me those biscuits. Or you might have said something which to you, because you've developed your ethics and you've developed the skills, to you, that's a stain in the mind, and it just feels like suffering and you don't like it. But actually nobody else even noticed, because it's such a slight thing. But to you, it stands out because it's, compared with the mind otherwise, it's happy, it's peaceful, it's not obsessed. And therefore, this stain really stands out. And you go, oh, well, there's a subtle aspect of, say, taking that which is not given or whatever it might be. Oh, I've seen that. So the only way you can see it and truly understand it is because you made the mistake, because in that moment, you were unskillful. And it might very well be that your contentment with little becomes such that, and I'm not suggesting it should be like this, but it might be that you go, well, they didn't actually expressly offer those biscuits to me, so I'm not going to take one. you know, and that's renunciation, isn't it? It's like, well, I haven't actually been, it's not actually been said, so I won't take the risk. It's such a small matter, and obviously in the grand scheme of things, it really doesn't matter.
It's also generosity as well, I suppose, isn't it? Because you're letting somebody else potentially have the biscuit that you didn't take.
Well, there's always that.
Yeah.
There's always that. Or, you know, if I don't eat this bicky, it might go all soggy in the tin and nobody gets to eat it. So I might as well dig in. That's my greedy, my oh dear. Terrible. But it's a really good observation. And you say, because all of this is context driven. And I would say the other aspect about ethics is the same with generosity. It's not going out trying to save the world. It's just as you go through your day, the opportunities to practice keeping the precepts naturally manifest. Yeah. So it's no grand gestures. And, you know, we're not the karma police. We're not here to tell everyone their business. And if you do keep the precepts, you will notice other people not keeping the precepts more. Just like when you practice generosity, you notice other people not practicing, or other people practicing generosity more. So, but the more aware you become of other people's behavior does not give you license to then start stipulating to them how they ought to be living their lives. This is about your own personal training in developing an understanding of what is skillful and what is unskillful in terms of our behavior. Thanks, Peter. What else can we say about ethical conduct? How to develop it, what implications it has for our practice. Peter, hello.
Yes, it's the fifth precept. We're not harming anyone else if we go over the edge with indulgences, but it does impinge on the purpose of the precepts of developing the mind.
I mean, I agree, but with one exception. We all know somebody in our lives who is an alcoholic or who has a drug problem, and they do harm other people.
Yeah,
their addiction does harm other people, unquestionably.
Yes,
yeah. But I understand the point that you're making. Please carry on.
I just wondered what you thought about caffeine and nicotine. How much do these spoil the meditation mind, if at all?
I can't speak for nicotine anymore. I gave up when I entered the monastery. So that was like over 20 years ago now. So I'm really glad I gave up nicotine. I do think that has a depressive effect on the mind. I am, however, absolutely and utterly guilty when it comes to caffeine. I confess. And I don't like decaf. It's one of my guilty pleasures. I love coffee. I think it's fantastic. One of the best inventions. And I've developed different ways of actually making it now. Does it affect my meditations? Yes. It does. I think it. I do think it sort of. It definitely makes the mind restless. And so if somebody is willing to go that far in abstaining from caffeine, I think it probably will help to calm the mind down. I think caffeine has many beneficial qualities to it as well, but it can induce things like, or exacerbate things like anxiety. But again, I come back to this idea of a middle way. right? And so, you know, you can limit the amount of cups of coffee that you have, perhaps. Only drink a caffeinated drink after you've meditated, perhaps in the morning or whatever it might be. They do recommend, or I've heard it said, that it's quite healthy to wait at least an hour and a half before you have your first caffeinated drink. But that's by the by. So I think it's the moderation thing, maybe, Peter. You know, but at some point it's got to just be a personal decision, hasn't it? I mean, there are certain circumstances I don't mind having an alcoholic drink. It's not absolute abstinence. It's knowing what you're doing, being intelligent, being skillful, understanding the context. Because what we don't want to do is to fall into the trap of attachment to rule and ritual. We need to keep the mind lovely and flexible and adaptable. If you just stick, you adhere to a rule, no matter the context, you become utterly inflexible and brittle. If, however, you understand the context, you're adaptable, you can make intelligent decisions as you go along. Yeah, that's a huge part in developing the intelligence and the flexibility we need for meditation. So it's not just no, never under any circumstances. One intends to be as harmless as possible, both to others and oneself. Yeah. So it's all in the intention and understanding the reason for the rule.
I was also thinking of alcohol at the level of table wine to assist in the digestion of what otherwise might be a heavy meal.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, it's all context derived. I'd never heard of that as an aid to digestion. However, in which case a small amount of wine we could classify it under medicine, maybe. I don't know. I'm trying to help you here, Peter. Don't know how well I'm doing.
Sure.
But we all have to make our own decisions. And this is a really important aspect. When somebody comes along for the first time to the centre and we have a chat, and I introduce the idea of keeping precepts, we encourage people to keep the precepts as best they can for the duration of their introductory period. If they decide they wish to carry on, because what you've got to do is give a fair trial to keeping the precepts as part of the overall training. It's an absolutely essential ingredient in the training. So you do have to keep them if you want the meditation to go anywhere. So they keep them for the 6 weeks. If they decide they wish to carry on attending the centre, which we very much hope they do, but we understand if they don't, that's fine too, then it's up to them. It's their choice. And if you carry on practicing mindfulness wholeheartedly, the attempt to become more mindful of states, external and internal, and you start to piece together which actions produce the painful feelings, which actions produce the pleasant feelings, then gradually, and you do your best to keep the precepts, and if someone chooses to do that, then they start to get a real good sense of why the precepts are such a good idea. But it's up to that individual. Because it's such an important part of certainly the way I want to teach this, which is like you retain your sovereignty. Don't do anything because in regards to your spiritual development and the realization of Nibbana, don't do anything just because somebody else says so, least of all me. Do it because you understand that even intellectually, even speculatively, this might be a really good idea for me. This might really help with my levels of happiness. This might really help with reducing levels of suffering. And even if you're not quite sure, but you're willing to give it a go, then you discover through your own direct experience why, say, keeping the precepts is a good idea. Then you're not doing it out of any sense of obligation. You're doing it because you see it as a part of this dynamic teaching that transforms the nature of your life. So do it for you. Do it because you want to do it, not to try to fix to a pattern. Don't do it to try to be a good Buddhist. Yeah, there are no good Buddhists. There are just people who are trying to become more skillful, and in order to become more skillful, you have to make lots of errors, because that's how we become skillful. Therefore, you keep the precepts because you want to, not because you're being told to. Yeah, that makes sense, because I just think that's so important.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thanks, Peter. That's for everyone, not just Peter. But yes. What else can we say about ethical conduct? So how are we going to go about keeping these precepts? These are 5 precepts. Birgit, hello.
Hello. I was just wondering whether it's about being as mindful as we can be about the choices that present in our everyday life, and sort of being aware. Like I keep thinking about little grubs that I found in the sink at some stage, and
Little what?
little grubs, like tiny worms or something. I don't
Oh,
know
yeah.
where they came from, like from the compost or something. And I
That's it.
sort of I took 2 or 3 outside, and I thought I had them all. Locked the door again, closed it all up, and found another one. Went out again, and had to do the same thing for the fifth one as well. Like, I wasn't particularly keen going through that process several times, but it just, like, in a way, I knew that there wasn't any choice. It wouldn't have felt right doing anything else, so there wasn't any option.
Okay, there you go. It's all context related, and doing your best is all you need to expect from yourself. And so you would prefer the suffering of dealing properly with those little insects, which are phenomenal beings in their own right. And we've got these modern cameras, these modern smartphones with these amazing cameras. If you were intending to squash a little bug or something, first just go in with your macro on your camera and just take a really good, close, hard look. There's just this little alien, helpless little alien. We call it a ladybird or something, and it's just this most amazing being right there. And the more closely you look, the more aware you become of the magnificence of life. Because don't forget, underlying all of this is the wish to realize the infinite mystery. And even a little bug, a little insect, is a finite expression of the infinite mystery. And what we're just gonna so the more sensitive you become in that way, the more mindful and more careful you become in that way to be harmless. And it's it's this idea that these opportunities present themselves. You don't have to go out saving the world. That it's practical, it's pragmatic, it's reasonable. And you deal one-to-one with life as it's presenting yourself, and you learn to pay attention to what's really going on. All right, we're coming to the end now. Mark, you have an observation.
Hi, Paul. Yeah, my observation was I find it useful just to make a note of stuff when I if I perform something that's not too clever. So if there's for instance, some harmful speech, say, you know, in a conversation with someone at work, for example, and then there's a kind of, you know, I might realise it later because there's painful feelings and so forth, and some craving and stuff, and so it's just kind of making a note of it, and then just seeing, you know, over a bit of time, I was seeing patterns.
That's good. That's really, really good as part of your meditation journal.
Yeah.
Keep it on a separate piece of paper, because this is one thing I learned from being a monk. We had rules. Every month we would have a rules reading, and then we would confess any broken rules. Then we would rip up the piece of paper with all our confessed broken rules and throw it in the bin, because we don't want to linger on them. We want to take the necessary information and the knowledge about what is skillful and unskillful. It was an unskillful action. You experienced a painful result. You wanted things to be different in some way, shape, or form. But at some point, yeah, you just have to torch that piece of paper and forget all about it. So absolutely, really good to reflect on it, but also remember to jettison it as well.
I sometimes find the act of writing it down helps kind of clarify it from a kind of a sort of a slightly less kind of invested way. You know, it's more, it's kind of, it's like a step back, if you know what I mean. It's more sort of clinical.
Yeah.
You can see the, that was just craving.
There you go.
You know.
Excellent. Yeah, very good point, Mark. Thank you. And just as a final observation, this has nothing to do with trying to come over like a pious, better than everyone else kind of, you know, persona. It's nothing to do with that whatsoever. It is so pragmatic and so, it is literally about learning what works and what doesn't work. And you don't have to put on airs and graces. You don't have to try to fool anyone. We're all human beings and we're all liable to error, and we make mistakes, and we pick ourselves up, we dust ourselves down, and we carry on, and we just learn as we go along, and gradually you do learn the lessons. So this is not about trying to show the world what goodies we are. So good luck. Your mission, if you accept it, is to spend a couple of weeks developing ethical conduct. And we'll have another chat in 2 weeks. Nice to see you all. Keep up the good work with the mindfulness, and we'll catch up again in a couple of weeks.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Really helpful.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Paul.